Here in Coronado, and we have a very special program as we always do. So it's very pleasing to see so many of you here on a Friday morning. So thank you all for coming. And again, Lyman Green is here to serve us coffee. Thank you, Lyman. And now that we're all comfortably seated, I'll ask you to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As you probably know, our programs are recorded for a live Zoom feed. So they'll be available for viewing later so that those of you who cannot attend can see it later on the library's channel to be available either today, probably today, or later on. And I'd like to thank for the recording, Selena Valladolid and Tara Davies. Thank you very much, as usual. Later, we will have also 2 programs coming up. On September 22nd, I will be speaking on genealogy, DNA, and ancestral voyages. For any of you interested in genealogy, family history, and what DNA has to do with all of that, that'll be on September 22nd. And in October, we will have Admiral Terry Craft speaking about the Midway. But for today, we have a very special program with retired Captain Dave Landon, who is a native of Guilford, Connecticut, and he graduated from the University of New Hampshire with a BS in Business Administration. He served in the U.S. Navy as a pilot and retired as a captain after 30 years of active duty. While in the Navy, he was a commanding officer of 2 aircraft squadrons, the Southern California Offshore Ranges and Naval Base Coronado. After retiring from the Navy, he was a principal and chief operating officer of Priority Solutions, a permanent placement recruiting firm. And after selling the business, he worked as a program manager and leadership advisor for Scientific Applications International Corporation. He was hired and assumed the position of president and chief executive officer of Systems Technology Incorporated, an aerospace engineering firm located in Los Angeles. He served in that role for 7 years. He retired from STI in 2018. In retirement, he serves on several nonprofit boards and mentors other CEOs, sharing his knowledge in the hopes that they can find value from his experiences. Dave is a board member of the Coronado Roundtable, the Friends of the Library, and past president of Coronado Historical Association. Please welcome retired Captain Dave Landon.
Thanks, Captain. Well, thanks all for coming today. And can everybody hear me? Should be mic'd up good. Okay, great. Can't you? It's not on. I'll give her 2 minutes to cut that out. That good now? Can you hear me now? Okay, good. Well, thanks, Christian, for that, that intro. But this is my real bio. Nope. Really, I'm pushing. At the computer. Okay.
It's just everything.
I can go manual.
Oh, that's why. Make sure that there
Oh.
isn't anything like that on the screen.
Okay.
There you go.
So there's my real bio. So somebody asked me what what was the reason for me having interest in the history of Coronado, and it all went back to my time when I was commanding officer, Naval Base Coronado, and the Navy had decided that they were going to do away with the libraries because the Navy said sailors don't read anymore. So they put together a learning center, basically a bank of computers. And when I went over to look at what they had done, my public works officer was giving me a tour, and he said, "What do you want to do with all of this historic crap?" And I go, "Well, define crap." And so we went into the storage area, and there were boxes upon boxes of historic documents and historic photos. And I said, well, the one thing we're not going to do is throw it away. So we brought it over to the admin building. And over time, on the weekend, I would come in and I would kind of go through it. And a lot of the stuff got sent back to the Navy Yard. We shared the photos that were specific to Coronado with the Coronado Historical Association. And then we had a bank that we've had over there that we're still going through, and it's being digitalized so we don't lose that history. So with Coronado and San Diego in particular, it's like, where do you start when you talk about the history of Coronado? Well, we can go back 240 million years to the Triassian period, and there's Coronado right there. But we're not going to go back quite that far when we had dinosaurs. This is the beginning of the dinosaur age. But we'll go back to 1542 when the first European, because the Kumeyaay had been here long before that. The first European that arrived here was Juan Cabrera. He came here with his 3 ships and came into the beginning part of San Diego Harbor. And historians feel he anchored, his 3 ships anchored right there by Ballast Point. And that was the first record. And his notes in the logbook said that San Diego was a very good protected harbor. So nothing happened for another 60 years until 1602, when Sebastian Lescano came in and sailed by the 4 Coronado Islands south here and came into, and as part of his visit here, he drew the first rudimentary map that exposed the rest of the world to San Diego Harbor. And you can see how he did it, but that not too bad for somebody who didn't go all the way in and didn't explore the land. But that was the beginning of the world knowing about San Diego Harbor. So there were no other Europeans that came to San Diego for another 167 years. And so when the next part of the San Diego history that's picked up is in 1769, when Father Sierra at Fort Guillermo's, I'm not making this thing work. Let's go manual here. Came in and was looking for water, a closer water source other than the San Diego River. And in this particular image is not historically accurate, but it's the only one that I can find that points out one thing that's important, And that is this little area right here, which is what was called Whaler's Bight. It was a freshwater spring, and the whaling ships were coming in, and that's how they would replenish. This area now is filled in, and it's where the all the ammunition is stored over top of this right now. So being able to get access to that is probably not going to happen. But one of the things of interest in 2017, NOAA did some soundings off in the bay off of Coronado, and there is a significant freshwater aquifer that's right there off of Coronado that's still there today. So we know that fresh water that was present here in Whaler's Bight is still out there. Over time, this started to be called the Russian Spring, because the Russian fur traders that were catching sea otters off the coast were coming in here to replenish their freshwater supplies. And Spain started to get nervous that the Russians were going to come in and take over their land that they had claimed for the King of Spain. So the Spanish started to visit San Diego more frequently. In 1846, the then Spanish governor of California, Pio Pico, granted the land to his what it was the mayor of San Diego's future son-in-law, and he asked the governor to grant the island, the North Island, South Island, and Silver Strand as a wedding gift to his soon-to-be brother-in-law, son-in-law. So he did. So he granted to Don Pedro Carrero. 6 months later, Carrero sold the land to Mr. Bezer Simmons, who was a local sea captain, and he sold it for the amount of $1,000 in silver. So he only held it for 6 months. So I guess that's another way of regifting, but and taking some cash for it. But that's what they did. Mr. Bezer Simmons owned the land. While he owned the land, he sold it reportedly 5 different times to 5 different owners. So that plays into some history that comes on not too long after that. But anyway, as part of that, one of the he got into financial difficulties, and so he had to sell the land to a group. And in 1850, the state of California came into existence. But in 1869, there was a lengthy land court issue that came up that they were trying to settle out who exactly owned North Island. And the result of that, Mr. Archibald Peachy and William Aspinwall, who were both lawyers, were granted the title or awarded the deed. But as part of that, what is of interest to us now, it's why we're going to this point, and this is what Coronado looked like this is a map from 1857, was as part of that land grant, they decided they needed to determine what the land areas, what the borders were for North Island and South Island. And so what the land court decided and ruled was that the area of North Island was determined by the high water mark on South Island. So North Island was all of here and all along here. You can see where the tan is versus the green, and that's the high water mark. But also for South Island, where the border was for that was the land area, the high water mark for South Island. So when people ask today, why does the Port District have property in here? Is that all that land that was filled in along by Ferry Landing, by the park, by the yacht club, by the golf course. Well, the golf course was all unfilled land. It doesn't belong to South Island or City of Coronado. It belonged to the state. Now it's overseen by the Port District. So that land was all filled in during the 1930s when we dredged the harbor, and they needed to put somewhere to put all the fill from digging up the harbor. How the court rulings or what the established law is that if the land area in a body of water expands naturally, then that belongs to the property owner. But if it's filled in by man, for some action by man, then it doesn't belong to the landowner. So that's how the law reads. With the exception of one place here, and that is where the shores is. And in the late 50s, early 60s, there was a significant dredging of the harbor, and they dumped the sand off the coast. The Army Corps of Engineers testified that that sand that was dumped off of this area right here would not migrate onto the beach. But if you look at the early pictures of the dell is right on the water, and now it's a significant difference away. And so it came into a court action again, and they audited biologists that came in, and the biologists determined that the crustaceans that were here that expanded this land area were from the harbor, but not from out here, not naturally. But the owners of the dell that way were good political friends of the then Governor Jerry Brown, and he enacted specific legislation that said that it was in fact naturally occurring. And so this area right here, by that chunk in front of the dell and by the shores, was ruled to be part of their property, and it's the only place that's ever been done. So that's how that came about. If you want to know why is that not part of the property? Mr. Peachy, Mr. Aspinwall sold the lease of land to Captain Bogart, a local sea captain, and he went in and started to. This is an early picture from the same time period. And they leased the property, and he built a small farmhouse and a barn on it, and started to try to farm the land. He had some success, but not particularly. He had a crop of barley that he planted the first year, and it was eaten by some deer and antelope that came up the coast along with the rabbits, and they did it a second time, but then it finally took hold. The land continued to pass from hand to hand. Charles Howley bought it for $110,000, and he cleared all the lemonberry bushes off of it. In 1877, Jordan Gurness bought it for $116,000, so it went from 110 to 116. And then finally, in 1886, the two people that we're probably most familiar with, Elijah Babcock and Hamilton Story, bought the property. There was also another partner in there that a lot of people don't realize, and I pronounce it here, Jacob Brennendijk. It was three partners, and I don't know what happened to Jake, and I didn't see any history of it. He was part of it, but then he fell out, so it was just the two primary partners. This is the land is looked with Captain Bogart. You can see the area that were fenced off, and some of the farming that went on there. So, another view. So, Mr. Hamilton Story and Elijah Babcock. The real visionary of these two men was Elijah Babcock. He was the one that really saw what the potential was for this particular piece of property. they had come over. They would come out in vacation in San Diego, and they would row across the bay up to over to North Island, and they were hunting jackrabbits was the main thing, and there's still a lot of jackrabbits on North Island, and also some fishing. But they envisioned what they saw this potential for this piece of property was they wanted to have a world-class resort. When they bought the property, if you remember, the property was originally sold for $116,000, and then they bought it for $110,000. So it's probably the two things that happened with that transaction. One was that was the last time the property was sold as one contiguous piece of properties: North Island, South Island, and Silver Strand. And the other was he sold at a loss, which is probably the last time split land was ever sold at a loss in Coronado. So they envisioned that world-class hotel, and you can see that's where they'd set up some of their, when they were starting to get ready to do the sale of the land, because they needed to finance this hotel. And this is part of the picture of the prospectus that went out to potential people that would want to come, that were going to come over to buy the property. They wanted to raise $1 million, and the exact amount was never known what they did, but it was in the vicinity of twice what they originally thought they were going to get for selling off the property. So they had a public auction. They did that, and of interest to any of you is this map right here that was printed on canvas. That's in Coronado Historical Association's archives. That original map. So what they had was the bidding started at $500 a lot and went up to $1,600. There were 6,000 people that were there to at that first auction of land, and so they were able to raise the cash that they wanted to begin doing on that. That was on November 13th in 1886. So they started the construction. They brought down these barges of wood from the north. It was made up of redwood and Oregon sugar pine. And that was very fortuitous, because the skeleton of the dell is made out of redwood, and redwood has natural properties to deter termites. So that's helped preserve the hotel dell in its current condition. The other thing too that they did was, at the time, electric lights were first coming into being, and they were unsure of which way it was going to go, whether it was going to be gas, which was how most hotels at that point in time were lit, or electricity. So the original Dell superstructure had both electricity and gas. And most of those early hotels, wooden hotels like the Dell, burned down because of gas, fires caused by gas. So that was another reason why the Dell has been able to survive. So construction began, and there was a recession that happened at the time, and so Mr. Babcock and Mr. Story got into financial difficulties. And kind of a back note, Babcock and Story decided what they were going to name this area what we're on right now, and they had a contest to what the naming contest it was done, because up until that time, Coronado was just known as San Diego Peninsula, and so they had a contest, and it was decided that the name Coronado what they would do. It actually was Coronado Beach, and they thought that would be more alluring for investors and people to buy Coronado Beach. But then the city itself was just shortened to Coronado. One of the things I just came to mind, what I forgot to tell you all, was that original map of Point Loma. A lot of people don't realize was that Point Loma was an island. The San Diego River came down and bisected Point Loma, and part of it went into San Diego Bay, which is an area which is now called Dutch Flats, which is where the MCRD is right now, and the other part went into Mission Bay. And it was in the 1800s that the city fathers of San Diego changed the course of the river so it didn't flow into San Diego Bay anymore, because it was silting up the harbor. So many things that were done in San Diego over time were done for strategic reasons of why to do it, in order to make the harbor a functional and commercial and military achievable harbor to make it functional. So anyway, so the construction started. Mr. Babcock and Story got into financial problems and enter John D. Spreckels. He had been a minority stockholder in the company, so he came in and took over the entire enterprise. He obviously finished the construction of the Dell, and he also built a marine railway on North Island. And North Island they used as bridle paths and for fishing and for other things for the tourists that were coming to the Dell. So enter Uncle Sam onto North Island. In 1893, the city fathers they kept on trying to dredge the entrance to the harbor coming into San Diego Bay, and the natural circulation. And this is looking. You can see right here. That's Point Loma. So we're looking south, and this is the bay entrance. So the circulation in the harbor is counterclockwise. And so what was happening was the natural flow is the tide takes the sand from down in Imperial Beach up the Silver Strand, and then deposits it right at the mouth of the harbor. So even every time they kept on dredging it, it kept on silting back up again. So they realized what they needed was to have a jetty that went out from the part of North Island. So the government came in, the Army Corps of Engineers, and they condemned 18 acres on this point of land on North Island. What they forgot to do was they started construction, but they forgot to get title to the land before they got construction. So the Coronado Beach Company, CBC, not the Coronado Brewing Company, but the Coronado Beach Company, brought them to court, and they wanted $775 an acre for the 18 acres they took, and the government offered $5. So they went in and they went to court, and so what they ended up doing was, instead of getting that $755 per acre that they wanted, the courts awarded them $774.55. So they got that. But anyway, they built that jetty. Started. They had a grant from the Congress for $65,000 to have that done. That also plays into the buildup of the sand along the beach, our beaches, because in addition to having the majority of the land that was built up, the beach land was built up from the dredgings that came ashore, but also that natural scurrying action that occurred because of that circulation went away, and so that jetty stops that. So that also causes that the sand to build up along our beaches. So when Imperial Beach used to get our sand, they used to get their sand back. It doesn't happen anymore. It ends up staying here. So the next thing that happened was San Diego wanted to put on an exhibition or exposition for the digging of the Panama Canal, what we now know as Balboa Park. And so what happened was they were trying to figure out, the San Diego fathers were trying to figure out how are we going to raise the money to do that. So what they did was they said, okay, aviation is just coming into light, so let's have an air exhibition here. So they, at the same time, Los Angeles wanted to do the same thing. So they entered in an agreement with Los Angeles and San Diego. And what they said was, San Diego said, okay, LA, we'll support your exhibition if you will support ours. So they had the exhibition and they went up. And there was a famous French aviator who was there by the name of Louis Pelham. And they offered him $5,000 if he would come down and put on an air exhibition in San Diego. And he agreed to it. And then what happened was that San Francisco heard about this, and so they offered him $25,000 for it. So Louis Pelham went off to San Francisco. So the city of San Diego goes, okay, we need somebody. And there was another famous aviator by the name of Charles Hamilton who was there. And so he agreed to come down. And so he came down to San Diego to put on an air exhibition. And it was held over in the Polo Grounds, over here and where the country club is today. And it was extremely well attended. So he took off from the grounds, and then was attempting to set an altitude record. And so he attempted it, and anyway, during his attempt, his engine failed on his aircraft, and he landed on North Island, which is the very first recorded landing of an aircraft on North Island. So there was such a success. San Diego realized that they really need to get into the aviation game, so they started to look for another aviator to come in and do this and promote it, and they recruited a man by the name of Glenn Curtis. And so he came out and looked at North Island, scouted the areas all around San Diego, but looked at North Island. He goes, this is a perfect place to be. It's flat, there's a steady breeze, and there's this calm body of water between North and South Island called the Spanish Bight, because he was working on developing a seaplane. So he agreed to come out. And so they approached Mr. Spreckels and said, hey, we'd like to do this, and we'd like to do it on your land. Would you be willing to lease the island so we could set up a flying school? Mr. Spreckels thought that was a good idea also, and so he gave Glenn Curtis a lease for 3 years for $0. So the idea was, okay, we can set that up. So the flying school, the flight school was open on January 17th, 1911. Mr. Curtis was out here already. And in January 26th of that year, Mr. Curtis made the first seaplane takeoff and landing of any aircraft in the world. It was done right there in Spanish Bight, and that's a picture of that aircraft as it was right there. Mr. Curtis also realized that if he's ever going to get this aviation idea in his school working, was he needed to bring in the military. So he offered the opportunity to the Army and to the Navy to each send out an officer, and he would train them for free to learn how to fly. So the Navy sent out 1 officer, the Army sent out 3. The Army never could count. So anyway, this right here is, oops, all right, now it works. This is Lieutenant Theodore Ellison, Naval Aviator #1. He was a submariner, for those who have a submarine background. So our naval aviation has its roots in in submarines, right? Somebody asked me, why do you become an aviator versus a submariner? And I said, well, in aviation, I know I can always go down, but if I'm a submariner, it doesn't mean I'm always going to come up. So this guy right here is Lieutenant Kelly, which is Kelly Air Force Base is named after. So there's Lieutenant Ellison right there. And there he is again right there. And that's Glenn Curtis with him in that. What's of interest also in the archives of the Coronado Historical Association are Glenn Curtis's personal logbooks are in our collection also. So at the same time frame, the Navy's coming out to do this, but they're going, okay, now if we're going to fly, what are we going to do with aircraft? Everything we do have this thing that's kind of our main mission that's on ships. So how are we going to make those two work? And so while this was going on, it started before the first aviator company came out in the fall of 1910. Was Captain Washington Chambers was given the mission to observe everything that will be of use in the study of aviation and its influence upon the problems of naval warfare. So Chambers quickly realized that if they're going to do this, you've got to figure out a way how to incorporate, how to land and take off an aircraft from the ship. So he attended a meet on the East Coast with, while I was there at the meet, Mr. Curtis was there with one of his pilots, a guy by the name of Eugene Eli, and he approached him with that, and he said if he would supply a ship, would they be willing to try to take off and land in it? And they said, sure, we'll give it a try. So they did, and that's a picture of Eugene Eli right there. Before his first flight off the ship. You can say he was an engineer by trade. He was graduated from the University of Iowa. He started off early on in the automobile business, both first as a salesman and as a mechanic, and then a race car driver. But then he found out about aviation. He was a self-taught pilot. He got an airplane, taught himself how to fly. So you can see right here, he's getting ready to go. He has a leather football helmet on, and you can see this around his shoulders. Those are bicycle inner tubes. So if it went into the water, he said, well, this will help me float. So they set up a ship in Hampton Roads and set up a flight deck, built a flight deck on the USS Birmingham in the harbor. And the flight deck was 80 feet long. And so he took off. That's a picture of him taking off. And when he went off the bow of the ship, he went down and and bounced off the water, damaged his propeller. So he staggered the aircraft over. And to those of you who have been in Norfolk and know any parts that have been there, it's an area called Willoughby Spit. And that's where he landed, safely landed. So they go, okay, this worked, not quite what we wanted, but it worked. So then they decided, okay, now we need to, the real thing is whether or not you can land this thing. And so the question came up, if we build the flight deck, how are we going to make this thing stop? So a guy came up with an idea. And this guy was young Lieutenant Theodore Ellison, Naval Aviator #1. He came up with this idea, and he said, we take mooring lines and we stretch them across the flight deck, and we weight them down with sea bags with sand, and then we'll have a hook on these aircraft, and the aircraft will come in and they'll catch the wires or catch the mooring lines, and will drag forward and will slow the aircraft down. So they built the flight deck on the USS Pennsylvania in San Francisco when San Francisco was having this air meet. So but they made a couple of changes. One, they figured 80 feet wasn't long enough, so they made it 120 feet longer. And the other thing they did was they lengthened the wings of the aircraft to get more lift. So 2 changes: bigger flight deck and more lift out of longer wingtips. So here's a picture of them, and you can see all the sea bags stretch across there. There was a total of 20 of them that did that, and this is his approach for that first landing. So there he is coming over the flight deck, and so he came in, and he thought he had it right, and he kind of floated, and he floated, and we said there were 20, and he went by 20, 19, 18, 17. He finally caught the 4th one, the 4th to the end, and it dragged him forward, and he stopped just short of the superstructure. There he is right there. And 2 things, I don't know if you can see it, but there's the hook right there. The first tail hook was right there, kind of like, I guess probably a midsection hook. And catching the number 4 out of 20 wire, I don't know how you grade that pass, but very good. But if you also check here, you'll see kind of a wet spot right there. I'm sorry, no, it wasn't. So anyway, he got there. He landed safely. And like a typical aviator, he went in, had lunch. He always had to eat, and then he took off. And there's his takeoff from the USS Pennsylvania, and that was on the January 18th, 1911. That's when carrier aviation was born. January 18th, 1911. It's the first flight. So the flying school was going on, and the Navy and the Army our Navy was buying aircraft, and there they are, right there. That was the entire Air Force of North Island. It was there at North Island, and they started the flight school. It was going strong. The Navy had ordered two aircraft from Curtiss and 2 aircraft from the Wright brothers. So 2 A1s and 2 B1s. So they didn't want to have all their eggs in one basket, so they're working with both aircraft manufacturers. This is one of the aircraft. This one particular one was called the Grass Cutter. It was purposely underpowered so that because what they wanted to do, they wanted to teach them how to fly and bank the aircraft and taxi it, but staying just in what they call ground effect. And so it was underpowered, so it would just kind of stagger along to it. And the reason they called it Grass Cutter was it was down here in the grass, and they couldn't get airborne very far to do that. So along with the Navy and the Army, Glenn Curtiss was also teaching civilian pilots how to fly. And so what he charged the Navy and the Army was $500 to train each one of their pilots. But it was getting more from the civilian side. But the very North Island is really the birthplace of many air forces or Air Corps, because the Navy trained, or Glenn Curtiss's school trained the first Japanese pilots, trained the first German pilots, the first Chinese pilots, and the first pilots from India. So it's really the birthplace of aviation for many nations across the world. Of course, when you think about it, we changed that trained the first Japanese pilots, and then we trained the first German pilots. It was in hindsight, it's always 2020. Probably may not have been able to move. So the cost for the Japanese though was a train. They had sent 5 pilots out here, or 6 pilots, and they charged them $250,000 to train those 6 pilots. So quite a bit of money. So as we talked about, the infrastructure at North Island was very austere. The part of the agreement was really a nebulous agreement that they had was with Mr. Spreckels, but they couldn't put any permanent buildings on the island. So the only permanent buildings that were there were actually two buildings. One was that farmhouse, and the other was this barn, both of which had been constructed by Mr. Bogart when the property was leased to them early on. So and the reason it was said that way was that, and I'll try to find the exact words. The exact wording was they didn't want any permanent buildings here, and Mr. Spreckels in their contract said, the giving of this permission shall in no way be interpreted or confused as conferring any permanent right in or to the island of North Island. So really what he wanted to do was, when I told you to get ready, I would just want you to get out of here. So the Navy left North Island in 1912 and didn't return until 1917. 1912, they went back to Annapolis, and then they stayed there until 1914, and then they moved down to Pensacola. But they continued to fly and to operate at North Island. And you can see the temporary structures. You see, it's not permanent. That's a tent, well, a walled tent, essentially what it is. So they continued to, Mr. Kearns continued to fly and train his pilots here in North Island. There's another picture in the bay. There's the Spanish flight flying there. You can see that kind of high wall. And for those of you who go, if you go to North Island, when you go through what used to be the main gate, not the gate now, but the gate that was on 4th Street, that was that when we started to develop, that was the main gate. But that area from there up to Flag Circle was all Spanish Bight. And as you go up towards Flag Circle, you see the land rise, and that's that area right there. You do that, so it's all water. So the first Air Squadron for Army Air Squadron came here in 1914, 16 officers and 77 enlisted. They also set up a school for mechanics here at the place. But aviation was still a very dangerous business. There were a lot of fatalities. This kind of the black humor was at the time was, you got to remember, these were all pusher aircraft, so the engine's behind the pilot. And the black humor was, what's the last thing that passes through a pilot's mind when he crashes? The engine. So the very first naval aviator to die was in 1913. It was an Ensign William Billingsley. He was flying at 1,600 feet over Annapolis. He fell out of the airplane. I don't know what happened. That was the first fatality. Nobody knows what happened. He was probably doing one of those ensign things and one of those famous last things, going, "Watch this," and fell out. Lieutenant Ellison, and then Commander Ellison, on February 27th, 1928, took off from then NAS Hampton Roads, flying to Annapolis at night, and the aircraft never landed. 3 days later, the wreckage of the aircraft washed up the shore on Chesapeake Bay. So he also was a fatality from flying. Nobody knows what happened to his aircraft. So the Army continued to expand its footprint, but again, it is very temporary. It's no permanent structures. These things can all be taken down, and the Army kept on trying to reach an agreement with Mr. Spreckels to buy the property, but he wasn't interested. And in his words, what he said was, his long-term goal was to develop North Island and construct high-class residential properties. So he wasn't interested in selling it. Some more of the structures. Again, you can see they're all temporary. They can roll them around, do whatever they do. They're nothing in discrimination. So then in 1914, enter the Marines. The 4th Regiment sailed down from Bremerton, Washington, and came in and anchored off of North Island. Pendleton went ashore. Colonel Joe Pendleton was in charge of this group and said he'd like to bring a company of Marines ashore to help guard the island. So he came ashore, but he didn't bring a company. He brought a regiment. So they're ashore, and so they don't have any infrastructure there. So they're bringing water over on barges and they carry around with buckets. And they go, well, this isn't working. And Spreckels wouldn't give them any water. So the Marines built their own pipeline across the bay, and got water piped over to the island. And then they didn't like the pier, so they built their own pier so they could start getting supplies over here. So, while all this is going on, and this is from the archives. Again, I'm pitching Coronado Historical Association, but there's so much history over there. These are the actual documents that are there in the archives, and this correspondence between Mr. Spreckels and the military, and you can feel the angst over time what's building up here, because first he has just a flying school with Glenn Curtis, then the Army and the Navy come, and the Army's doing all this stuff, and now the Marines are here. So we need to get this under control, and so he tells them, okay, the Marines, you guys have got to leave. So anyway, they leave, they pack up, and they go over to Balboa Park, where because the Panamanian exhibition had completed then, so they're living over in Balboa Park. And then what happens is that's in 1915, and then they move over there, and then the Department of Navy purchases a piece of property, again in that area, Dutch Flats, for $250,000, and that's where MCRD is today. They purchased that in 1917. The Army knew that their welcome was beginning to be worn out here at North Island, so they said, "Okay, we're not going to stay here permanently, but we need to find some other place to go. So can you give us another 18, 24 months, and then we'll find some place to go." So they came back and said, "Okay, you can stay here for another 18 to 24 months." Congress visits North Island, and they go, "This is a perfect place for a flying school." And they approached Mr. Spreckels again, but he said, "I'm not interested. I have other plans for this place." And supposedly there's a map somewhere of his design idea of what was going to happen at North Island, but we've never been able to find that. But we've been told that it's somewhere. And when you go through some of the documents, he refers to it, but we've never been able to find it. So in March of in December of 1915, they send a letter to Mr. Curtis and said, "Okay, we gave you've gone beyond your lease. We want you to shut down the flying school and move off." And so that was on December 3rd, and on December 14th, Mr. Curtis responds and says, "Okay, we're packing everything up. Thanks very much. We appreciate your generosity. We're out of here." So now the flying school is gone, but the Army's still here. So, and they're there, and you can see they're got all kinds of tents, and they've got their non-temporary buildings. They had 22 buildings now at this point when weren't supposed to have any, but they're here, and so there's no there's no record of why Spreckels didn't kick them off at that particular time, because now the flying school's gone, but they're still here. So but there is in the records, there's correspondence between Spreckels and the Army about this area called Coronado Heights, which is down at the bottom of Silver Strand, where the Navy's Silver Strand training complex is now, and it's right there. Why they call it Coronado Heights, I don't know, because it's like 2 feet above mean sea level. You know, if I was going to name someplace Coronado Heights, I would probably say over between 3rd and 4th on like E or someplace like E Avenue. But so what my thinking is that Spreckels didn't kick them off North Island because he's negotiating. The Army said, we want to move everything down here. And so I think there was a lot of negotiation going on, right? And I think what he's thinking is, okay, they're trying to get to this spot, and I'll just leave them where they are to do that. So that's all. There's nothing official that says that, but I think that's probably what his thinking was. So while they're all negotiating and everything's going on, then World War I happens. April 17th, U.S. on 1917, the U.S. enters World War I. On May 5th, the Army Navy Board say, we like North Island, we want it, and we'll figure out the compensation later. So they send a request to Congress. Congress authorizes it, and then the president says on August 1st, 1917, it's ours. So they take over North Island, and on August 11th, the Army Corps, Signal Corps, orders assumption control of North Island, and Lieutenant Earl Spencer shows up as the first CO, and they sign an agreement, a joint agreement between the Army and the Navy for North Island. Earl Spencer is probably his wife is more famous than him. His wife was Wallace Spencer, who later Wallace Simpson. So that's a whole other part of history. And construction began right away on North Island. You can see all the construction going on. They started to make all those permanent buildings. That's LP1. That building is still standing on North Island. That's they started to build seaplane ramps. You can see along the North Shore. And that's the blimp hangar. That's because the Navy was very interested in lighter than airships. That happened, started construction of that right away. So this was how the island was divided. You can see the Navy and the Army. And they built the causeway that went across the Spanish Bight. The main gate was actually right there. And if you go up on that area right on Flag Circle, if you look, there's a building, Spanish architecture off as you're leaving, and you look off to the right. And if you take a close look at the shutters, you'll see Army wings that are carved into that building. And if you also look closely here, you'll see the traffic's already backed up to the Orange Avenue. Yeah.
Where's the current headquarters building of with the big tower and the light?
Right there.
That's on the Navy part? Yeah.
Yeah, right there. Right there.
Okay, barely see.
Yeah. And so what about poor Mr. Spreckels? You know, they took his property. What did he get? Well, after the war was over, he did take him to court. And he was awarded $5 million plus $1 million and change for interest. So he got a total of $6 million for North Island. So thank you very much. That's the story.
we'll have 5 minutes for a coffee break, and then we'll have a Q&A afterwards.
Great presentation. Thank you very
Thank-
much, Dave. It was great. I was expecting something different, and you surprised the hell out of me, and it was very, very good. But my question is, I asked you this before. Why do the helicopters and the Ospreys go down the bay when it's so much closer to go via the ocean? And you've answered my question, but other people may want to hear the answer.
Oh. I guess there it goes. I can't speak for the current commanding officer, what the current course rules are to do that, but I can tell you from my time why they did it. First off, it's closer for the aircraft because all the helicopter squadrons and the helipads are located just on that northwest corner of the island, so it's a natural transition over to the bay. The other part is that they don't have to, because we have fixed wing traffic that's landing on the runway. If you go off down the bay, there's no interference, and it's easier for the pilots and for the controllers and for the sequencing of fixed wing traffic. That's the main reason.
Next question right here.
Thank you for your wonderful explanation of this history. Very interesting. My question is, were Mr. Story and Mr. Babcock local people, or did they come in from another part of the United States? And how did they hear about North Island?
Oh, they were from the Midwest and also from Pennsylvania. Mr. Indiana, yeah. And he was a railroad guy, and Mr. Story was a piano maker, manufacturer. But they didn't know each other until they came out here on vacationing and coming out to North Island, and that's where they first met each other.
Next question, Tom Mercer.
Dave, when did the Army Air Corps leave? And what infrastructure? You mentioned that one building at the top of the ridge, but did they leave much here, and where did they go?
That's kind of an interesting little segue also. There was an assistant secretary of the Navy that came out and toured the island and said this is a perfect place for the Navy. And this assistant secretary of the Navy became president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And in October 1935, by executive order, he said, "This place isn't big enough for the two of us." So they had the Army move. It took about another year and a half for all the Army to get off, but they eventually did. But that's how that all came about. Another interesting bit of trivia. Yeah.
Next question in the back.
When that plane was landing on that ship,
Yes.
and it got down to number 4, did it not catch any of them? Did the cable break, or
No,
did
it
the
just- yes.
bags move?
It just floated over top. It wasn't. The aircraft was floating. Sometimes when you're on an airliner, you'll come in, and the pilot will flare, and it'll just go along, and finally touches down. Kind of that same concept. Yeah.
Next question, Harvey.
Rumor has it that the Army started the I-bar. Is that true?
Yes, it is true. It was.
The Army.
Yeah, that was one of the original Army structures, and that was senior officer quarters. And that building, everybody calls. Well, why do they call it an I-bar? The reason it's I-bar is because it's building I. And so the history of that became there was a bar they started just for senior officers, and then more junior officers started coming in. Over time, it evolved into a bar for the officers. And everybody goes, so why do they call it world famous? That's where the first meetings of the Tailhook Association started in that building. Yeah.
And Dave, since you're talking about the I-bar, for those who are not familiar, would you tell the audience what the rules of the I-bar are?
Sure. There's some very specific rules when you go into the I-bar, and if you violate them, what happens is that you have to buy the house around. One is you don't wear your cover, your hat, into the I-bar. You don't put your hat on the bar. That's number two. You don't while sitting at the bar, you can't talk on your cell phone, and you also can't put your cell phone on the bar. So any one of those 4 violations. So oh, and that's right. Last one, good. There's a bunch of models that are hanging from the ceiling. If you touch any of the models, then you also buy a round. So, and in the last Top Gun movie, the woman that played the bartender, his romantic interest, I can't remember. I'm bad with actors and actresses' names, but anyway, she went in there and laid her cell phone on the bar, and she had to buy the place.
Next question.
Dave, thanks for the early history of North Island. You had a picture of a blimp hangar there.
Yes.
Where on the base was that? And can you add any more about the history of dirigibles and blimps here at North Island?
I'm not conversant in the history of the airship, but it was it's about halfway between Flag Circle and Air Forces building as you're driving toward Air Forces. It's on the left-hand side, and it was there until I would say late 1970s when they finally tore it down, and now it's an administrative building for NavAir.
Next question.
You had comments about the early Del Coronado. Also, Hotel Del Monte in Monterey. Is there a connection there between both of them? Currently, the Naval Postgraduate School, and I think Spreckels was involved with that too.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not familiar. I've been to that hotel yet, but I've never looked at that history.
Next question, Armando.
Thank you for your presentation. When did they fill in the Spanish blight, and was there a lot of controversy involved with that?
It was filled in the 1940s. Kind of an interesting, every time you look at some of the history of North Island, there's always kind of an interesting segue and back history. The commanding officer of the base at that time made the decision. It had started to fill it naturally because when they built the causeway, it restricted the flow, the tidal flow coming through there. So over time, it started to silt up. But the commanding officer, it was in 41, made the decision to fill it in. And the captain at that time was a guy by the name of John McCain, who was Senator John McCain's grandfather, who was CEO that made that decision to do that.
Next question.
Thanks, Dave. Great presentation. Can you enlighten me on, wasn't the Langley out here in one of the first actual aircraft carriers as opposed to modified? It was modified too, but when was that?
1923 was when the Langley showed up here. And that picture we had up there earlier showed a dividing line, but I should have pointed out there was an outline of the Langley's flight deck that they had built. They had paved over so it looked like the flight deck so they could practice landing on it.
Tom?
Yeah, recalling some of the pictures I've seen, I know there were battleships during World War II moored at the bollards of the mooring buoys along the northwest corner there. But were the aircraft carriers during World War II mostly based here too, or were they already up at Long Beach or Alameda?
They were here, and that was part of the impetus to dredge the harbor that they built. There's a whole, I could give a whole other spiel on how they expanded the area of North Island, because North Island originally was 1,200 acres. And its current footprint is 2,400 acres. So they doubled the size of the island by filling it in. And not a little trivia, we built when we nuclearized the piers at North Island. When we say nuclearized, we had to increase the power requirements, electrical power requirements, because it takes so much more power, shore power for a carrier. But anyway, when we built, which is Peter Kilo, we had to fill in the bay a total of 5 acres in order to do that, and the Coastal Commission wouldn't allow that, and so the Navy came up with a compromise. So we filled in 5 acres on where Pier Kilo is, where the carrier is. And if you were to look at an aerial shot of North Island today, over on the bay, there's a 5-acre notch that is cut out. So we had to dig out 5 acres and then we filled in 5 acres. So we didn't change the footprint of the acreage in North Island.
Thank you very much, Dave. That's a great talk, very interesting. We love to hear about Coronado and its history, and that's a very big part of why a lot of people are here in Coronado today, and its heritage. So thank you very much for your talk.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you all for coming. Next month is about genealogy, and October about the Midway. So
Great,
hope you can come back.
Oh.
Great, thank you.